Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, we have our strange stories. And of course, we have a strange and of course, we have a strange story. We're gonna be hopping into with our boy Mr. Ballin because again, y'all know he tells a story so freaking well. But this one is apparently about the Russian sleep experiment. I can only imagine what's gonna be, the details about this story because humans are freaking crazy, like running around like mad scientists, and sadly, people have to be victims to these crazy people. But let's go ahead and hop into this strange story with our boy Mr. Ballin.
It turned out that he had physically torn his vocal cords from screaming incessantly.
Oh, already. Ooh, I know that's not a person.
In the height of World War II, Russian scientists wanted to find a way to keep their soldiers awake longer. And so they devised this experiment, this human experiment, to test the effects of extreme sleep deprivation. And so what they did is they rounded up 5 prisoners of war and offered them their freedom if they went through this experiment, which I can tell you
It'll never be
went
free.
sideways. And so the way it worked is they were going to be put inside of this sealed gas chamber that continuously was going to administer this stimulant gas. It was an experimental stimulant gas. This is not something they knew much about, but they were fairly confident that it wouldn't kill them and that it would keep them awake. And so they put them inside the chamber and they started administering the gas. This was not at a time where they had closed circuit cameras. Those weren't around at the time. All they had was, they could put microphones in there, and they had these 5-inch thick little porthole windows. They had one porthole window where the researchers could look into the chamber itself. So the experiment begins, and really for the first 3-4 days, everything was pretty normal. At about the day 4 mark,
So they stayed up for
researchers
3 or 4
started to
days.
notice a change in what they were discussing, the subjects. It went from kind of small talk over those first few days to fairly dark. They started talking almost exclusively about traumatic events that had happened to them in their life. And around the day 4 mark is when the subjects started complaining about being in this test at all. The first few days was filled with some optimism that this was their ticket out of the terrible situation they were in. And then it really turned into, this is a terrible situation. I think it was around the day 6 mark, the subjects stopped talking to each other completely. They became paranoid of the other subjects, and they went to their own sections of the chamber. And
they're going crazy.
They had places
They need
to
to go
sit.
sleep.
There was
Go to
food, there was
sleep.
water, there was a bathroom. There was books in there to read. They kind of took up space inside of the chamber. They began to believe that they could kind of like sell out their comrades in exchange for getting out of this experiment. So they would, one by one come up to the porthole or go over to one of the microphones that was obviously placed inside the chamber and start whispering these kind of
that is not a person.
Subjects to try to get them in trouble in exchange for being released from this experiment, which
That is not a person. That cannot be a real photo of a person. Sleep got you looking like that? Losing sleep got you looking like... We need to all make sure we get more sleep in our life. But obviously, it had to be the effects of that gas, too, that they were administering. And I forgot he said they was, putting gas in that chamber with them.
The researchers, they didn't care what they said. They just listened and watched. After 9 days, the experiment took a significant turn for the worst. It was the morning of I think it was the 10th day, where the screaming began. One of the test subjects began screaming. And at this point, everybody is totally like segregated. They're not talking to each other. They're muttering and whispering. And one of them just starts screaming. And so for 3 hours, they watch him scream at the top of his lungs and run back and forth across this little chamber until he stops screaming, but he's still running. And they could kind of pick up on the microphone that he was still making sound, but it was like these little squeaks. It turned out that he had physically torn his vocal cords from screaming incessantly. The other subjects didn't react to the screaming at all. It was like it wasn't happening, but they're in this confined space, right? It's like so loud in there. And all that happened is, as he's screaming, the other subjects began ripping out pages of the book, soaking them, and then pushing them up against the porthole glass, obscuring the view. So by the time the subject who had torn his vocal cords stopped, well, by the time he tore his vocal cords and it went quiet, the researchers couldn't actually see into the chamber anymore. And once the guy had torn his vocal cords, there was no more sound in the room. So their view was obscured, and now it's gone silent. After 3 days of talking about what they're going to do, of complete silence in the room. Like they can't see in, it's silent. They're monitoring the oxygen levels in the room, and based on oxygen consumption in the room, apparently they could tell that there were people in there, probably at least 4 or 5, that were breathing oxygen because it was being consumed. So they believed they were alive, but after 3 days of silence, which really didn't make any sense, they determined that, well, either our microphones are broken, and that's a problem, or there's something wrong with the subjects themselves. So they decide that they're going to use the intercom to reach out to the subjects. And
don't nobody want to go in there, though. They want to try to talk to them through the intercom first. They scared to go in there to check on them. Y'all done created some monsters. They in there looking crazy like that.
They tell them that they're
losing their mind.
Come into the room. Like, hey, we're going to test the microphones. We're going to be coming into the chamber. You need to lay on the ground and not interact with us. If you comply, we will offer one of you immediate release and freedom. So there's silence after they use the intercom. They decide to do that. They talk to the intercom, and one of the subjects, now to this point again, for 3 days it's been silent. And one of the subjects, clear as can be, talks into the microphone and just says, "We no longer want to be free." And so the researchers were like, okay.
That cannot be a person balled up looking like that. What the?
Yes, they're alive, and our microphones work, so they don't go in. They stay out of the chamber. What? Silence continues all the way up until the 15th day because, the window's still obscured.
Why they didn't just go in and take the paper off of the window so they can see?
Subjects are not speaking, they're not muttering, they're not whispering, it's just silence. And on the 15th day, at midnight on the 15th day, they decide that the experiment was over. And so what they did is they flushed the room of the stimulant that had been continuously pouring into the room. They turned that off, and they replaced it with fresh air. And that's when they started hearing the screaming from the subjects inside of the chamber. They were begging them, the researchers, to turn the gas
stuff back in,
pleading with them, like begging, please turn it back on, as if they were dying. And then they opened the chamber, and now they're laying eyes on the chamber for the first time since like the 10th day. So it's been like 5 days. And they're seeing the chamber with their own eyes for the first time. And it's straight out of a horror scene. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive. The 5th subject, who had perished at some point, there was chunks of flesh that had been taken off of his chest and his leg and had been jammed into the drain in the center of the room. And they had turned on the water in the bathroom and had flooded the room. There was almost 4 inches of water on the ground. Like
they literally created freaking monsters.
Like, lots of gross stuff in their water all over the ground. And there's this dead subject. And all 4 of them have also, there's chunks of their own flesh that's been ripped off of their body. And it was later determined that it was self-inflicted, these chunks of meat that had been pulled off of them. And it was not by teeth either, it was by hand. And also they were eating it. So they were ripping off pieces of their body and eating it. The food storage that was down there hadn't been touched in days. It was like they had all completely lost their mind and began eating themselves. These subjects did not want to leave the chamber. They just continued to beg for the gas to be turned back on. So,
oh my gosh, they are addicted to the gas, y'all. They didn't pump that chamber up full of gas for that long. that these people are not sleeping, so they're losing their freaking minds. And then while they're losing their minds, they are eating. Like, do you know how crazy you have to be to like physically hurt yourself, especially to that extent? Like, they're ripping chunks of their own meat off of them and eating it, and then they're begging for them to turn the gas back on. Now, why they flooded the room, I don't know. They down there crawling around like little monsters, but this is messed up. Like, this is crazy.
So finally, they brought in some soldiers to actually extract the living subjects out of the chamber, but they fought so aggressively.
They don't even look right. They look like monsters.
Jumped up and bit the neck of one of the soldiers, and he actually bled to death.
Oh.
Also, one of the subjects in the struggle, his spleen ruptured, and he bled to death. So now you have 2 casualties just getting them out of the room. They finally get the 3 remaining subjects, living subjects, out of the room, and they heavily restrain them. They bring them to a medical facility because they need to go under surgery because they've had chunks of their own flesh ripped off. They're totally emaciated.
What did they expect?
And the most injured of the 3 is immediately brought into surgery, while the other 2 were just kind of held in a holding room. And they try to give him a sedative in order to prepare him for surgery. This is not the anesthetic. This is just the sedative. And it's like he's immune to it. You know, they give him a sedative, it does nothing. He's just like resisting them, and he keeps begging to go back under the gas.
Oh my.
And then finally they say, okay, well, we're just going to give him the anesthetic now. And when they bring it out, they tell him, we're going to give you an anesthetic and we're going to give you the surgery. He starts viciously fighting back. He does not want the anesthetic.
Man, let him go back to that gas where he want to be.
Anesthetic, and he must remain awake. He needs to remain awake, coming back under the gas. And in his struggle to not have the anesthetic given to him, he manages to tear one of the leather straps that was holding him down, so like an extreme amount of force. And then finally, when they give him the anesthetic, they had to give him like 10 times the dosage or whatever just to get him to calm down.
What?
As soon as he fell asleep, he died. So after he passes away, they move on to the next worst off subject, the guy who had torn his vocal cords and couldn't speak. They bring him in for surgery, and he can't speak, but he's shaking his head because he doesn't want the anesthetic, he doesn't want to go under surgery, and he's fighting with them, and he actually just passes out from exhaustion. And he too, once he falls asleep, or I guess falls unconscious, he dies as well. So now there's only 1 subject left. The other 2 that had lived to be pulled out of the chamber have now died as soon as they fell asleep. And
now I know that last one was like, you better not put me to sleep. I know you just seen 2. Look, they just tried to tell y'all not to put us to sleep. Now you just seen 2 of them die as soon as they fell asleep. Don't put me to sleep. I know that last one was thinking like, look, don't play with me. You seen what just happened. Do not put me to sleep. Like, this is crazy. Like, their bodies are, I don't know, like used to being up to where, I mean, if they go to sleep now, they gonna take that long sleep, like that forever nap. This is crazy. This is like,
I just don't have any idea.
Yeah, this is crazy.
Instead of bringing the last survivor into surgery, because now they've witnessed 2 surgeries end in death, they decide, let's put this guy back in the chamber and turn the gas back on, because apparently that's the one thing that's keeping these guys alive. And so in preparation for being put back into the chamber, they hooked him up with an EEG. It basically measures your brain waves, which I guess they hadn't done to this point in the experiment.
Really?
And so they put him in there, and the scientists are watching the readout of the EEG, and they noticed that like his lines would just, you know, inexplicably flatline and then go back to you know, up and down and then flatline again. And one of them had the wherewithal to look at the subject as it's flatlining, and they could see that every time he closed his eyes, it was like he was micro-sleeping, like these little blinks. Basically, every time he fell asleep, for like a fraction of a second,
he was dying?
It was like he was suffering a brain death over and over and over again. And as they're monitoring this, and they know what just happened to the other 2, they died when they fell asleep, they're trying to rush to get the gas turned back on to keep this guy alive. But they didn't do it in time, and he eventually succumbs and falls asleep. And they can see, before he ultimately dies, that initially when he finally fell asleep, the EEG showed that he had fallen into a deep sleep. And then he flatlined and his heart stopped and he died. All of the subjects died, and no one really knows what killed them. Was it the sleep deprivation? Was it the gas? It could be a mixture.
I think
of the
it was
two,
both.
We'll never know. But either way, all of them died. Now, this is actually just a story, and there's no evidence to suggest that it's even true. But during that time frame in the 40s, during World War II, there were known cases of horrific, unethical human experimentation happening, like in the Japanese, that awful Unit 731. I would not suggest Googling that unless you got a really strong stomach. You had in the concentration camps, the German concentration camps, human experimentation was definitely happening. And obviously Germany and Japan are not Russia, but it was just in this era where human experimentation was definitely happening. So even if this particular story, the Russian sleep experiment, is not true,
I mean,
I wouldn't be shocked in the least
horrific
if
ones
there
out
wasn't
there.
a similar study done somewhere.
This is bad.
Obviously, the
worse.
results could vary dramatically, but I do think that it's certainly possible that something like this could have happened. We continue to study sleep and sleep deprivation, and really there's not much known about it. We don't even really know why we sleep. But we do know that you will die if you go without sleep. I think the longest any human went without sleep was like 18 days. And I can actually speak from my own experience. I was a Navy SEAL for 7 years, and we
don't even look like the same person.
Week, in initial training, where over a period of 5.5 days, you sleep for a total of 4 hours. Not every night 4 hours, but a grand total of 4 hours. And it's split up into two little chunks, 2 hours and 2 hours. And then there's like a 15-minute and 15-minute nap thrown in there too. And you really just lose your mind after 72 hours. I remember I was constantly hallucinating that when I was around my classmates, their head would turn into a big Rubik's Cube and start flipping around. And even when I got right next to them, their head would still be flopping around like a Rubik's Cube. And that's only 72 hours in. I can only imagine what would happen at 15 days. So that's going to do it. I hope you enjoyed it.
I can only imagine what that person who ever went 18 days without sleep was seeing. They probably was losing their freaking mind. Yeah. I hope that story is not true because, I mean, just think about it. Obviously, like, we all know humans freaking suck. Like, that's just crazy. Like, the crazy things that have happened throughout history. And this is partly why when you see, these different diseases and sickness come out and people are not rushing to go get them. Because, nobody got time for y'all to be saying, if you've ever gotten such and such, you may qualify for a lost $1 million lost flight. Don't nobody care about that. Like, when you already messed up, what's gonna do that money don't matter. Like, they always trying to come out with that. If you've ever used baby powder in 2005, you may qualify. Something like that. But yeah, that's crazy. Like, there's actually, well, first, I hope that story, like I said, is not true, because just think about it. Like, if they have access to that type of gas, and that's a real thing, like, they could just release that on people whenever they felt like it, like whenever they wanted to. Like, what can we do? What can we do? Yeah, okay, yeah. Anyways, but yeah, that was crazy. I honestly wouldn't even doubt it if that was actually true. Oh yeah, as well too, y'all. I'm already losing my train of thought. It was a movie too. I forgot the name of it. I'm always forgetting stuff. I know I don't need to go without no sleep. I'll definitely lose my mind. I already be scatterbrained. So your girl do not need to go. No, try to even go a long period of time without sleep, because I would just lose my freaking mind. But there's a movie that I watched, I want to say it was last year, and it was something like this. Something had happened in the world. They don't know exactly what it was, but all of a sudden, people, one day, people were not able to sleep, except certain people. Like, one lady, it was her daughter was able to sleep or something like that. And yeah, people were basically losing their minds and killing each other and dying because they were no longer able to sleep. So they're trying to, to hurry and rush and find this cure. I'm gonna have to look it up, and then I'll pin it down. Like, I'll comment what the name of the movie is in the comment section if I can find it. But I thought it was a good movie. But yeah, y'all, they be making movies, y'all. All these movies, they be coming out with this stuff, and it's just like, oh, please don't let this happen. Like, for real, real life, because we seen what happened 2 years ago. Everybody's life was turned upside down. You know, that disease magically popped up out of nowhere, got released to the public, and all this crazy stuff started happening. It's just crazy, y'all. It's just crazy. Like, just a lot of stuff that just can happen out of our control. That's like the scary part. But thank you guys for watching. And yes, you guys already know that you will see your girl tomorrow. And bye, you guys.